The Southlands is a large tropical continent located far to the south of the Old World, beyond the mysterious realm of Araby and the land of the dead. Its northern landmass is a barren wasteland of deserts, studded with dusty and deserted tomb cities, while further south it is a land of unspoiled jungle and swamp, isolated from the realms of man, elf and dwarf for uncounted centuries. Many brave or foolish explorers and treasure hunters, though the two are often indistinguishable, have attempted to penetrate the thick jungles that make up the majority of the southern region of this land, but almost all have never been seen or heard of again. Fan legends tell that the Southlands was once joined to the continent of Lustria, which is borne out by many identical species of flora and fauna indigenous to both. KARAK ZORN is a legendary dwarf hold, built thousands of years ago at the extreme southern tip of the World's Edge Mountains. Contact has long since been lost between KARAK ZORN and the rest of the dwarf holds. Whether the stronghold still exists and has just been cut off in some way, or even if it ever existed, is uncertain. But details of its fabulous treasures and the incredible wealth of the kings are often discussed over a few pints of dwarf ale. If tales are to be believed, KARAK ZORN is carved from a mountain of gold. Its massive gates of ivory are bound with red copper. Rubies and diamonds are so common that they are used as minor units of currency instead of small coins. Supposedly, the stronghold is surrounded by steaming jungles full of fearsome creatures and hostile savage orcs. Maps circulate purporting to show the location of KARAK ZORN, but most are wildly different and look distinctly conjectural. Sometimes gullible travellers pay good money for such maps, much to the derision of hardened adventurers who know better. Expeditions have never succeeded in finding the lost stronghold, but tales persist of explorers who find the place by accident, but who never seem to be able to retrace their steps, describe their route, or provide any convincing proof to back up their wild stories. To date, KARAK ZORN remains a fable, but perhaps one day a haggard dwarf explorer will solve what has remained the most perplexing mystery in all of the dwarf realms. According to dwarf legends, the long-lost stronghold of KARAK ZORN lies in the far south of the World's Edge Mountains, deep in the heart of the Southlands. It is likely that this is the closest stronghold to the original homelands of the dwarfs in the southern part of the World's Edge Mountains. It is said that thousands of years ago, dwarfs journeyed along the mountain range which forms the spine of this vast continent. They reached the southern end of the mountains and built a stronghold, known in legend as KARAK ZORN. If this is so, then the stronghold probably would have been situated high above the surrounding jungle, among the snow-capped peaks. Here the dwarfs would flourish in a climate not unlike that of their better-known homeland. Maybe the dwarfs of KARAK ZORN encountered the lizardmen. If so, it is not recorded in any known dwarf sagas. Almost certainly, the dwarfs would have been interested in the gold and riches of the city of Southland, and fascinated by its stone architecture. They may have even made contact as friends, and the lizardmen of the Southlands tend to be slightly more agreeable than those of Lustria, so it's more of a possibility. The mysterious silence surrounding the fate of KARAK ZORN could be due to the war with the lizardmen, since the ancient records of Southland refer to strife with KARAK ZORN occurring in -2000 IC, and little was heard of it since. But it could have just as easily been due to war with the undead of Nehekhara, who sealed off the route to KARAK ZORN centuries ago. Perhaps only the lizardmen of the Southlands know for sure what came of the dwarfs. But if this is the case, then it is likely that no one will ever know for sure the KARAK's eventual fate. So today we'll be asking the question, who destroyed KARAK ZORN? It seems to be the most reasonable explanation of why they've lost contact with the rest of the dwarfs, So let's run through the possible culprits in the area and see what might have happened here. Now, something that was said earlier on about the Southlands that I was reading was about how the flora and fauna tend to match the flora and fauna of Lustria, the plants and animals of the area. One of these that don't seem to match Lustria are the savage orcs, which are a particularly primitive animal that you don't seem to find in Lustria. So let's dig into this, because there's a lot of them in the Southlands, and possible culprit? Question mark. The savage orcs are a notorious subspecies of the greenskin race, whom have devolved back to the Stone Age society that revolves around the ideals of the Old Way. These savage orcs are the result of an overexposure to extreme heat, which gradually damages the already small brain of an orc until its intellect becomes primitive, even by the standards of other greenskins. As a result, the arid landscapes of the Badlands are infamous for having the largest population of savage orcs within the whole world. The Badlands is the small region that is kind of slightly hilly, where Wurzag spawns on the map of Total War Warhammer, if you don't know what I'm talking about there. But of course, as well as the Badlands having a huge concentration of these savage orcs in a small area, the criteria of extreme heat is certainly met on the equator, in the jungles and savannas of the Southlands, which is basically the Warhammer equivalent of Africa. However, as the greenskin race fought against more advanced civilizations of the Old World, the orcs began to salvage and steal bits and pieces of their enemies' armor and weapons. Soon, competition for these weapons and armor became largely commonplace, and only the largest and most brutish of their kind were having the rights to use them. Yet the greenskins themselves had yet to gain the knowledge of crafting basic iron weaponry of their own, and as such were forced to hold on to their primitive stone axes. In time, however, orc slaves that had escaped the large slave markets and industrial factories of the Chaos Dwarfs began to teach their fellow brothers the art of making simple and iron weapons and armour. This technological advancement made the greenskins an even greater threat to all of the civilized nations of the Old World. This all became evident once the tribes of mankind began to migrate westward in their thousands, as their still primitive longswords were no match for the orcs' iron cleavers. Now, if you've ever watched my Bretonnian lore series, which I think might have been my oldest lore series, so I'm not sure what the quality of that is saying at the minute, but I'm sure it's, if you know the format of my videos, I'm sure you'd be able to get through it. And it might be interesting to see how I started, I suppose. So yeah, I'm going to Jew out for a minute and plug that. But yeah, it does mention how the tribes of humans came into this kind of Reich Basin, as they call it, where the Empire is and where Bretonnia is, by migrating over the mountains from the west. And this alludes to why this has happened, because it says at this point the humans had bronze technology, as in for weapons and tools, whereas the greenskins, by being enslaved by the Chaos Dwarfs, actually got a leg up, technology-wise, against the humans. And I mean, I can see how that is just going to completely break the camel's back in terms of how you're going to be able to fight them off. I mean, orcs have so many inherent advantages in close combat over a human, in general. And, I mean, if they also have a better metal for their weapons than you do, I mean, it's pretty much game over. And I can see how this happened. Even just the massive morale hit of this, once your guys realise that the orcs have a better metal that you haven't even discovered yet. Even just the morale hit of that would be massive, because it must be hard to get a load of humans to stand up in close combat against orcs anyway. If you can really imagine, just take a second and really get into imagining what it would be like to fight an orc. And you'll see what I mean there. You're going to have a lot of ideas behind your supremacy over the orc. for people to be able to stand up against them. A lot of ideas beside physical strength that you feel like you have one over them on. Organization and weapons technology and stuff like that. So I can see how it would be so hard for humans to take orcs on in their early history. I mean, realistically, I'm not sure if we would have managed to get to the kind of Middle Ages, in inverted commas, like that level of weapons technology, if the orcs were around. I mean, we might have the orcs might have wiped us out in the actual timeline. If they were around at the same time we were fighting with the Neanderthals. Yeah, I don't know. But I guess they just fight against each other so much that it's probably possible. I think. And I suppose before humans had built cities and stuff like that, like huge collections of humans in one area, when we were still hunter-gatherers, the orcs wouldn't be forming wars, because a war is intended to go after like big prey, in inverted commas, and have like big fights that the orcs like. Thinking that, well, I'll go in with this big war boss because on a primal level the orc knows that the big war boss is going to have a big fight and he wants to get into the big fight and get bigger. It's basically like this weird kind of primal sense that they have. So yeah, that's not going to be happening until cities are invented. So I suppose that could keep the orcs just basically exclusively fighting each other. And I mean just killing things that they come across, instead of behaving in more of an organised way, if you can say that about an orc war. I mean, it's not organised compared to a well-trained army, but it's still large collections of orcs moving as one and attacking specific targets. Well, specific as orcs can be. So I suppose the most vulnerable period in human history would be when humans are starting to collect into cities and towns so that they can be attacked by large collections of orcs, and it incentivizes the orcs to collect into these large collections, but they don't have the weapons technology and the training, and just like they haven't got to that level in military science to be able to fight them off. I mean, especially if the orcs are going to just get this random boost from being enslaved by the Chaos Dwarfs and working out how to work iron before the humans are. So that does actually make a lot of sense. Once again, Warhammer lore, it's crispy. It's spicy every time. Goes down smooth. As of today, the orcs have many rituals and odd traditions that are particularly unique to their Stone Age culture. For instance, instead of using armour and weapons, which they despise because they go against their cultural code, the savage orcs make use of war paint as a form of protection. This is usually daubed on by the tribe's shaman, where they splatter and scrawl these crude glyphs and shapes into their skin that are trying to protect the orc from fatal blows. These tattoos can differ from each tribe, where some are simple pictographs of certain objects or symbols, while others are more kind of glyphs like thunderbolts and axes. Although based mostly on superstition, these war paints have been noted to work on several occasions, where blows seem to magically bounce or shear off, leaving the skin completely unharmed. And this is because the orc magic, which is a kind of war magic, which is a type of magic that runs off people's belief rather than the actual inherent chaos energy, which is where other magic comes from. So it doesn't come from the winds of magic, these bits of energy from the immaterium that are based off the emotions of living sentient creatures. This is magic that is, I guess, already tapping to the core of that, which is tapping into the beliefs and feelings of the orcs around them. So basically, war magic gets more powerful the more orcs are around, because of the fact that all the orcs believe that the user of the magic is going to do something. And the more that are there to believe that, that creates more energy. So more spells can be cast and more ambitious spells can be cast. This war paint is a similar thing, so I suppose the war paint is going to have more effect the more orcs are around in the army, believing that their war paint is protecting them. To be fair, I can kind of see how they left this out of the Warhammer game. The Total War Warhammer game, anyway. But if you've played Warhammer 3, Dawn of War 3, I mean, you know, the new Dawn of War game coming out, if you played the beta of that, you will see how the way the orcs scale up is creating more and more war towers. And so it builds up this energy of war. And the war is the energy of the orcs coming together and believing in this whole idea of the war. So that is the primitive form of magic that the orcs have. Oh, and why I see they left it out of the Warhammer Total War series is that I can see how this would just become snowbally and cancerous. So once the orcs get to a certain level, they're just buffed in every way because of war. Another custom that is consistent within savage orc tribes is their preference for primitive weapons made of bone, stone and wood. This is to keep the old way that their race once followed, but perhaps it is most believable that savage orcs are simply incapable of crafting iron weapons due to their extremely low intellect. So this is kind of their way of saying, we was Kangs. We're good really. We're just keeping the old way. That's why we don't have iron weapons. You know, we Kangs. So I'm going to have to be honest here, and I'm going to have to just go out and say that I think the Savage Orcs didn't break into KARAK ZORN. I don't think they have the technology, I don't think they have the organisation, and I don't think they have, to be frank with you, I don't think they have the IQ. Now, close to KARAK ZORN is an Arabian city called Kar, which is the city that the trader and scholar who explored the Southlands and made contact with the lizardmen in the Southlands from Araby, called Ibn Jalaba. He set out from Kar in 1150 IC to go talk to the lizardmen. But I think we can basically rule this out, because the Arabians are supposed to be trading with the dwarves from there, and I don't see why they would attack someone that they were probably making a lot of money from. As we know, the dwarfs are kings of their trade in terms of mining and extracting those precious minerals when you don't have enough minerals. So, yeah, I find that hard to believe. I think we can rule them out. It's going to be great, by the way, to see a fleshed out Araby faction in Total War Warhammer 2. They have said they're going to do the Southlands, and I mean that means they're basically going to have to include Araby, otherwise it's going to be strange little pocket of nothing on the map there. And to be honest, it's kind of strange that they never fleshed Araby out, to be honest. You know, you would have thought they'd do that, because surely a lot of the battles of the Tomb Kings must be against Araby. Yeah, it's really surprising to me how they haven't become more of a, you know, one of the mainstream factions, to be honest. Even just from people being interested in the lore and wanting to kind of reenact the crusades of the Empire and Bretonnia against the Arabians, and battles between the Land of the Dead and the Arabians, which I presume have happened, seeing as their lands are kind of thoroughly overlapping here. Right, this is pretty underreported and talked about in the lore, to be honest, but I've just found that there's a imperial colony in the Southlands on the west coast, which is funny because I believe that's where we started colonizing Africa, on the west coast. So it's kind of mirroring the history once again here. But yeah, it's called Sudenburg, and it's like a trading colony to trade with Araby, I suppose, and explore the Southlands. So there's certainly a lot of reason for battles between the Empire and perhaps other human factions that journey to Sudenburg and then go to explore, and the battles between them and the Lizardmen, or the Tomb Kings. So, this transitions me into one of the more credible threats against the dwarven KARAK. So, surrounding this KARAK, we have a lot of Tomb King settlements. We have Bagar, Qatar, Rasetra, and Marak. Rasetra, apart from being, as I found out on Google, the name of some kind of establishment in Lithuania, who someone gave a 1-star review to that I'll read at the end because it's pretty funny. Yeah, apart from being that, Rasetra is a city in Nehekara. It is located in the southeastern corner, maybe 1,300 miles from Kemri, and is surrounded by jungles. It was once a large city established by King Rakash of Kemri, and was a defensive stronghold. Due to the distance from the centre of Nehekara, it is often the last city to be conquered by the major kings of the Nehekaran past. It was conquered by Ketep, as was all of Nehekara, but joined in the attack on Kemri during the reign of Nagash, so it's one of the good guys. Now it says here that in life, the people of Rasetra were very experienced in fighting because they always used to fight with the lizard men who live in the jungles just to their south. The city's just on the edge of the jungle, as it says here. And I guess as a result of this, they started to use the thunder lizard in war. And just let me read this bit of lore on thunder lizards, because they're just absolutely destructive. They trample through the jungle and will just destroy any trees in their path. Absolutely huge beasts. And the lizard men, as their temple cities are in the jungle, they have to deal with this, and it's some kind of like natural disaster if a thunder lizard ends up walking through one of their cities, because it will just destroy all of their houses and stuff like that. So all of the slan of the city have to bring their magical powers to bear on the creature's simple mind, and try to kind of Jedi mind trick the beast into turning aside and taking another route, which I guess is possible because they are so simple-minded, despite their huge size. There has been one instant in which a thunder lizard could not be turned aside. During the time of Lord Amazian's second ascension, one of these mighty behemoths was observed locked in deadly combat with some form of sea monster that had risen from the depths and come inland from the tarantula coast. The battle between the two creatures went on and off for the entire cycle of the moons, and destroyed vast swathes of the jungle. At the last confrontation, the combatants smashed through the outer limits of Zanhuapatek, the City of Mists. Although many slan pulled their magical powers, the mage priests were unable to penetrate the beast's frenzied minds to steer them clear. I guess because they were so involved in their fighting, it made them harder to hypnotize. When the waning beasts had finally passed on, entirely unaware of the destruction that they had wrought in their passing, the ancient temple of the lost had been destroyed, along with the countless numbers of the irreplaceable relics that had been housed within there since before the time of the great catastrophe. So a huge disaster for the lizardmen there, but that shows the power of these beasts. So I mean, if these Tomb King cities had decided to bowl up to KARAK ZORN with a couple of these, and huge undead hordes, of course wouldn't have any trouble with the altitude. Not going to get altitude sickness, are they? Yeah, and they have artillery and stuff like that. They could bash into the KARAK, I think. A little bit more information about the other undead settlements surrounding the KARAK. The city of Qatar doesn't really have a proud history, as it's usually just been conquered by other kings in Nehekara. But something that could be interesting about it is that it's got a lot of its structures kind of mined into the mountainside, which makes it slightly more plausible that they might come across the dwarfs and gain knowledge of them if they're in the actual mountain range, partially, some of their city. You know, perhaps they'll send some undead explorers out into the mountainside sometime and then decide to attack the dwarves. All we know about the city of Bagar is that they have bone giants. So, I mean, potentially a strong military there that could attack the fortress, but that's all we know. The strongest contender here, I think, is Marak. Marak is a city in Nehekara, located on the eastern side of the World's Edge Mountains, and the only way to reach it from the rest of Nehekara is via the Charnel Valley. The Charnel Valley gets its name from the piles and piles of corpses in the valley, and this is because the people of Marak have strong armies that have been known to use the valley for devastating ambushes throughout their history. In the living times of Nehekara, it was originally known as the City of Hope, and served as the home of the Priest Council of Nehekara. Marak is an ancient city, dating from at least the first coming of Setra. It is said that the greatest king of Marak, Far, held out against Setra's army by ambushing it in the valley. His troops were seasoned after fighting off countless orcs and goblins, clearing the region for the good of his city. Only after Far died could Setra take Marak. After the machinations of Nagash, Far was one of the first to rise from his tomb. He was infuriated to find that his descendants had bowed to Khemri, and ordered the mummies of the other kings of Marak dragged out and destroyed. Far had hoped that the kings of Marak that succeeded him would be as strong as he was and able to maintain Marak's independence, but now that he saw that the other kings had failed in doing this, he destroyed their mummies, which means that he is the only king of Marak, the only one to rise again from the dead, along with the armies. And he remains independent from Setra now, in the second coming of Setra, defying him wherever he can. He's recently fought a major battle against the orcs, destroying their army and killing their war boss, taking its head to add to his flail of skulls. During the battle against Nagash, under Al-Kadizar, the city provided their famed Jackal Squadron. So yeah, I like this Pharaoh Far. He seems to be a kind of diamond in the rough. Talking about the pharaohs of Marak. He's the best one of a bad bunch. So what do you think? Did the Tomb Kings do it? I don't think so, to be honest. Like, all the potential is there for them to attack the KARAK, but it doesn't really make sense in my head, especially with this Marak city-state thing. I mean, if this Pharaoh Far is putting all his energy into maintaining his independence from Setra, holding this Charnel Valley, then, you know, it's going to be pretty hard for him to launch a huge sieging force to take out a dwarf KARAK. You know, that's a big commitment to make. And this kind of applies to the Tomb Kings in general. They can't reproduce, can they? They're just skeletons. So, I don't think I would waste that many troops on just attacking a KARAK and then, you know, all you gain from that is a bit of mountains. They don't care about gold, I don't think, so, yeah. You know, it's possible, but personally I don't think so, but comment below. Right, so now we have the lizard men of the Southlands, who are slightly different in that they don't have the cold ones, they ride horned ones instead, which is a slightly different kind of lizard, but basically the same kind of thing. They use them as cavalry, and they are slightly more skink-based, using skinks instead of saurus sometimes as close combat units. Because their spawning pools just don't spawn as much saurus anymore. And the saurus that they do spawn are not for use as standard infantry, they're used as temple guard. A special kind of veteran strain of saurus that are destined to be temple guard. And that's all they get, really. So they've had to adapt, and that's what they've done, assigning the infantry role to skinks. And of course, the skinks have adapted to this and have gone more ferocious and are better in close combat than if you just took a bunch of Lustrian skinks and told them to go in close combat. You know, they've formed a military tradition of this close combat skink fighting. Another difference they have is that the lizard men of the Southlands are cut off from the telepathic energy that the slan of the other temple cities use to communicate with each other. The expanse of the world pond, which is the huge ocean between the Southlands and Lustria, and the curve of the world's surface prevent such telepathy between Lustria and the Southlands. This has led the Slan Mage Priest of Zlatland, which is the biggest temple city in the Southlands that remains, having to make their calculations and rituals in isolation from the other Slan. One consequence of this is that, although the Slan of Zlatland may deduce the time that an event predicted or planned by the Old Ones should occur, they are sometimes out of synchronization with the Lustrian Slan. It is difficult to know which school of Slan Mage Priest is the most accurate. Whereas the Lustrian Slan have suffered the loss of many key sacred plaques bearing the glyph inscriptions of the Old Ones due to raids, the plaque sequence of Southland is probably more intact, if not complete, due to isolation from raids. The Lustrian Slan are very arrogant in many ways, and are loath to admit that the Zlatland priests might be more accurate. So, because Zlatland has been isolated from raids, their sequence of plaques that they use to tell the future by the will and knowledge of the Old Ones is complete, or perhaps, slightly incomplete, but it's a lot more accurate than the Slan of Lustria. So this could manifest itself in this whole situation that the dwarfs, as we know, the dwarfs love gold, don't they? And they probably love to get into a temple city and, take away some of these artifacts. So perhaps, even if they never established some kind of connection with the dwarfs, perhaps these plaques told them that the dwarfs wanted their gold, and perhaps would raid them in the future for their gold. And so, by the will of the Old Ones, they decided to wipe the dwarfs off the map, with some kind of cataclysmic sequence of spells, perhaps, causing an eruption in the mountains that they have their KARAKs in, for example, or something like that. Who knows? There's a possible sequence of events here. Some more juicy bits of lore for you here in the page of Zlatland, the Lizardmen city in the Southlands. As to the undead legions of Setra and Nagash, they have never penetrated into the jungle to attack the Lizardmen, or if they have, then they have certainly been met with defeat. The mummified remains of the oldest Slan would be sought out by any power-crazed necromancer, if he knew where they were, and could fight his way in and out of a Lizardman city to get to them. There may have been a time when there was contact between the Lizardmen of Zlatland and the ancient civilization of Nehekara in its formative stages. The people of Nehekara could have been influenced by the Lizardmen cities in the form of their own architecture. From the Lizardmen, the rulers of Nehekara might have taken the idea of the pyramid and the practice of mummification. The priest kings themselves could have been set up in imitation of the Slan Mage Priests. It is possible that some early time the Slan of Zlatland encouraged the human population of Nehekara to build a civilization on the Lizardman model. They would have done this in order to further the plans of the Old Ones. However, when things turned bad in Nehekara, with the rise of Nagash, or more probably when the Slan realized things would inevitably turn bad in Nehekara, they cut off all contact and hid themselves within their jungles. The Slan would have been extremely anxious to prevent their arcane knowledge getting into the hands of Nagash or others of his ilk. To this end, they were supremely successful. Barely a handful of outsiders have ever encountered the Lizardman city of Southland. It remains a fable and a rumour. So the plans of the Old Ones there, that implies that they deliberately gave the Nehekarans the culture of the Lizardmen model in order to build this civilization so that the Tomb Kings would arise. Because the Tomb Kings would never have arisen back to life if this, knowing the future, if this whole civilization hadn't already been set up with the priest kings and this kind of death cult obsession with the mummification that it says they learnt here from the Lizardmen. So the Old Ones, in their infinite wisdom, have set up this whole plan for the Tomb Kings to be the thorn in the side of Nagash, even after they've passed on to the afterlife. and been resurrected by Nagash's own spell in his second coming, I suppose you could call it. So yeah, it's really awesome. Perhaps the old ones really do have the great plan. Perhaps it's not just Lizardmen mumbo-jumbo. So yeah, the potential's there for the Lizardmen, but still, I mean, Southland is a long way away from KARAK ZORN, and I'm not sure if they'd actually feel threatened, so it's still all up in the air, really. I mean, it's kind of like, to be anywhere near certain about this, there'd need to be some kind of civilization that can just attack anywhere, you know? And they can just come to any city and attack it without walking through all the countries surrounding it and stuff, you know? Like if they had some kind of way of bypassing normal ways of transport and could just surprise attack wherever they wanted and stuff, you know? But, I mean, I guess that's, you know, that's just not going to happen. That would be the perfect situation, though, so I guess... Who knows? Who knows who it is?
The most worst complaints about this company. I advise you not to go to the poor quality of service and unfair, and if anything came out that I came here, bring them near everything in advance, because they can cheat and you. Manager Mantas Masuskevicius is very impolite, and he said insults and 4-letter expressed dissatisfaction when irrational price of the service. I asked to pump the tank car because the improper fill up the fuel. They have not been able to find out how to get to the tank bottom, was too lazy to disassemble. It sucks the fuel tank through the filling hole. Kish horses, pipes and compressor flowing air. Fuel pulled out of maybe 12 liters, then asked to pull out at least 20. Not until the end of the service performed that result could be serious consequences to vehicle. For this pot boiler, Mars lasted 50 minutes on the phone, told to pay €30. €30 per fully performed half hours. I inquired as to why such a high price, said was necessary to consult the works. Now we will not dictate the price. I continued diplomatic negotiations. He began to express insults and threats. Having realized that facing an unfair man, I paid and went. True, did not prescribe any expense. Manager Mantas' work has been, and ordered the money to sue Valcusism Automechanica. I advise you not to go to the poor quality of service and unfair, and if anything came out that I came here, bring them near everything in advance, because they can cheat and you.